So this week we had Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh just wrapped up. This was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, the month of Cancer. And I know everybody seemed to enjoy a little bit of astrology from Eliyahu last week, so I thought I'd be a little more focused and look up and see what I could find out about the month of Tammuz. So Kabbalistically, the month of Cancer, people who are born in Cancer are you. Okay, great. Well, let's see how this fits. This fits. So my father.
June 20th.
July 1st. My son, July 1st. He's
That's
Cancer.
Gemini.
No, he's
Oh,
not.
that's Cancer.
It's a Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Probably Cancer.
So they're not,
It could be. It could be. It's close.
Then I'm Gemini then.
What's that?
Because I'm
It
June
it
21st.
it depends. You'd be. I think you'd be Cancer on the English no matter what, but you could be Cancer or Gemini in the Hebrew, quite easily.
Yeah, I've got it when it was.
We can look it up.
Yeah.
So, for example,
Well, that's when it comes back.
my dad was a Cancer. Cancerians are known to be to have deep emotions, to be emotionally connected. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're big crybabies. That they break down at in every emotional scenario, but they hold their emotions quite tight. Some of them do. Some you can see are quite emotional people, but a lot of them hold their emotions on the inside. Nonetheless, they are deeply connected to their
Would you
emotions.
say they're sensitive?
Yeah, sensitive is probably a good way to put it. They're sensitive to, especially to love of family in particular. Again, even if they don't show it, they may not be sentimental necessarily, but they're very sensitive about the idea of connecting with their family, of having a family. I know that was definitely true for my dad. And the idea of love and care, compassion for others. These are deep-seated ideas. Now, the idea of love can easily become one that becomes twisted. Love is intended to be an emotion that's shared without condition. When you love somebody, it's intended to be because you truly have the feeling connected to the great saying in the Torah that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And the idea is that you should love yourself unconditionally, and therefore you should love others unconditionally. Unfortunately, in this day and age, a lot of people have love conditionally. It's conditioned around how you treat my ego. If you treat my ego well, I love you. If you don't treat my ego well, I don't love you. And Cancerians are prone to falling one direction or another. And that's kind of the idea of cancer. Cancer in the body, if you look hard enough, I think medical science these days would tell you that everybody has cancer. The issue isn't the cancer. The issue is what happens with the cancer. So a cancerous cell is a cell that grows out of control, right? And the idea isn't necessarily to kill the cells, because the risk is that you kill surrounding good cells.
I think in a normal situation, though, that the body itself, when I say everybody's got a little bit of cancer somewhere.
Right.
But the body's immune system will take care of it.
Right.
When
It'll
the system fails,
prevent it from reproducing in an out of control manner, in a way that the body's no longer able to regulate or control. And so that's kind of true of love as well. Love has this incredible capacity when it's controlled, when it's held within a certain bound, the bound of being unconditional. Once you bind it, once you make it conditional, it becomes cancerous, and it becomes harmful in an incredibly detrimental way. I mean, the idea that love could become a negative emotion, but that's what it is. I mean, you hear psychologists these days that will tell you that love and hate are not opposite emotions. They are two sides of the same emotion. It's hard to believe, but that's the truth. The opposite of love and hate is apathy. You just don't give a damn. That's the opposite. But when you love and you hate, it's actually just two sides of the same emotion. But of course, you want to be on the side of love, and the side of love comes from being unconditional. So that's part of the aspect of being a Cancerian, is connecting to emotion, connecting to love, and connecting to unconditional love. And we all have that challenge in this month. I think as Eliyahu shared last week, we're all made up of all 12 parts of the zodiac, some stronger than others, but certainly when we're in a given month, we're affected more so by the energy of that particular month at that time, no matter what sign we were born under. You can be an Aquarius, but during the month of Cancer, you're a bit more Cancer. You're a bit more affected by Cancer. So it's something for all of us to be aware of. Another aspect from Kabbalah is that there are letters of the month. So there's a letter associated with the planet that controls the month, and there's a letter associated with the month itself. So the letter of this particular month of Tammuz is the letter Tav. The letter Tav is the last letter of the alphabet, of the Aleph Bet, and in the Zohar, all the letters come before Hashem, and they pronounce to him the reason why they should be the source of the creation of the world. Okay? It's a beautiful section in the prologue, actually, of the Zohar. And they're taken out of order. So Tav goes first. And Tav says to the Creator, I am the foundation of the word emet. I'm the last letter. So emet, which means truth, is a beautiful word in and of itself. It starts with the first letter of the alphabet, the Aleph, ends with the last letter, the Tav, and it has the letter that's exactly in the middle of it, the letter Mem. So emet, truth, is almost like the ultimate encompassment, so to speak, of the world. Okay, so this is Tav's argument with Hashem. I am the last letter of Tav. I am of emet, of truth. I am the one that ushers in truth to the world. And Hashem says, that's true. Unfortunately, you're also the last letter of the word Mavet, which means death. And for that reason, I cannot create the world in your name. And these are beautiful and short stories, and there's many, many secrets hidden within them. But that's the basis of the letter Tav. And it continues on from there. It's a little confusing where what the source of it was. I heard it mentioned in English, and then I had Rachel help me look it up in Hebrew, and we couldn't find the exact source. It looked like it was in either Mishlei or in Tehillim, in Psalms. But it refers this idea that the letter Tav, because it's at the end of the Aleph Bet, it protected all the rest of the letters of the Aleph Bet during the time of creation and into when Adam Rishon, until Adam was in the Garden of Eden. And at some point, the letter Tav said to Hashem, or on its own, it tried to protect Adam. Again, I couldn't fully understand the story, but tried to protect Adam from the snake and was bitten by the Satan, by the negative side, by the Sidra Achra. Okay? And in order to prevent the Tav from falling and being able to protect the rest of the Aleph Bet, Hashem actually had to push the Tav back up into place. And when Hashem pushed the Tav back into place, he shortened the leg of the Tav. So the Tav, we have... Is it up here somewhere? Well, that letter there, that's a Tav. The Tav is, we'll find it. But Tav is a very complete letter. It almost looks like an upside down U, and it's got a little hook on the end of it at the end. Mm-hmm. Okay? So the Tav supposedly was originally supposed to look more like a Kuf, and the Kuf actually goes below the line. Its left-hand leg goes below the line. And so the Tav was originally supposed to have its left-hand leg below the line. But when Hashem pushed it and pushed it back up into place, its leg became shortened back to a normal size. So both sides of its legs actually just go to the normal part of the bottom of the line. They don't go below the line like the Kuf does. So the Tav was the only letter that was bitten, or so to speak, had direct experience with the Satan, with the negative side. And as a result, the Tav was the only one qualified in order to protect this month, the month of Cancer, the month that has the potential to become Cancer, but also has the antidote to Cancer built within it. And one of the most negative days of the month, of the year, comes about in Tammuz. The 17th of Tammuz is one of the probably 2 or 3 most negative days of the year. It starts the 3 weeks of negativity, the Ben Mitzarim, and it's that twist It's that twist that gives cancer its potential energy to go one direction or the other. And the Tav, therefore, because it actually had a taste of what it was like to be touched by the negative side, also has, and it was rescued from it, it has the ability to do the same for us. Yeah.
I have a question about the 3 weeks. Okay, now I know during that 3-week period you don't get married. Is that applied to all celebrations? The reason I'm asking is my wife is planning a birthday party.
Yeah.
And it's gonna
Like a
be in
public celebration?
Yeah.
I'm not
Yes,
sure.
Rabbi.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that it's preferred that you restrict from public, like you.
So if I close the door, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea of a wedding is that it's a public celebration. Birthday, what are you going to do? Birthday's a birthday.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what are you going to do? But I think it'd be better to ask the rabbi. I agree. Okay, so that's a little bit about the month of Cancer, some of the energy that we'll experience during this month, and some of the potential, like I said, to become cancerous or to be rescued from cancer in all areas. Cancer in our finances, cancer in our work, cancer in our body, to be rescued from that, from something that grows out of control. That's what we're looking to be rescued from. All right, so I think I had mentioned a week or two ago that I wanted to start something new or try something new. I know the rabbi often studies from or teaches from books, and I thought that we would give that a try as well. So the book that I've chosen is this book. It's called The Practical Tanya. And the Tanya is one of the most famous Hasidic pieces of work. And it was written by the person who became known basically as the first Hasidic rabbi, you could say the first Lubavitcher rabbi, the first rabbi of Chabad. I don't believe it was known as Chabad at that time. My understanding, even from some references in this book, didn't become known as Chabad until shortly after this rabbi's death, but his name was Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. But again, he's the first of the 7 Lubavitcher Rebbes, the last one being the man they referred to as the Rebbe who passed away in New York about, I guess, 15 to 20 years ago or so now.
You said that he was the last one?
He was the first. He was the first. So he passed away in the late 1700s, I believe.
No, but you said somebody passed away in New York.
Yeah, so that would have been the man they referred to as the Rebbe.
Right.
Reb Menachem Schneerson. So
But there's no Rebbe now?
There is no Rebbe now. And I asked a Chabad rabbi one time, so why did it not pass to another generation? And he said it was known that he would be the last rabbi, the last Rebbe, and from now it's up to us. That's the way the Chabadniks, the Hasidic movement, that's how they see it. That now there is no one man in charge. It's up to us each individually to basically to finish the work. What's the finishing of the work? To bring Mashiach. That's the job that we have, is to bring Mashiach, to bring the Messiah, to save all of humanity. So, yeah.
Question. Bring the Messiah. That means there's certain actions that people are supposed to do, and if they don't do it, he doesn't come?
Yeah, so what we say is the phrase is not coming to me at the moment. Bimei Rabbi Amenu, Shayibaneh. I mean, Bimei Rabbi Amenu. The idea is that it may come swiftly in its day. Okay, this is a contradictory term that we find in our daily prayers, and it appears in several other places. The idea that it should come swiftly, but it should come in its day. So basically, the idea is that by our own actions, we can bring the Mashiach ahead of time, by our actions. Okay, and our actions can be those of negativity, that would bring basically the negative side of the Messiah, that would create a great deal of destruction before the saving of the world, or become through positivity, which would result in the uplifting of the world directly to.
But isn't there supposed to be a major war?
Yeah, I mean, there's the idea of the Armageddon War, the Gog and Magog.
Right.
That, but there are some people who say that that's the war actually we're fighting right now, because the Gog and Magog War, by some of the Kabbalists, they describe it as the war of thoughts. It's not a physical war. So now, why would they describe it as the war of thoughts? So, a lot of times you'd say to you might say to somebody, what would you rather do? Would you rather go to battle? I'm going to give you a gun or a tank or whatever I'm going to give you, and you're going to go into battle against the other side who's got similar weapons and, gear. Good luck. Would you like to fight that battle, a physical battle? Or would you like to fight a battle of your thoughts? I'm going to give you a challenge. Your challenge is to think only positive thoughts for the next 24 hours, 12 hours, 10 hours, 6 hours, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. And maybe I'll even say not just positive thoughts, maybe a little bit more elevated thoughts. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. How long can you hold that? So most people would think, oh yeah, I don't want to go to physical war. I'm risking my life there. You want to have a war of your thoughts? How many of us feel like we're elevated a level where we could legitimately fight a war of our thoughts and feel like we can come out ahead consistently over an extended period of time? That is such a workout. And I think most people, if they really, they're really honest, yeah, they'd probably take the gun in the tank and say, I'll take my chances.
But this is not a philosophical war. It's
Well,
not like having two, just for, argument's sake, capitalism versus communism.
Yeah.
It's not that kind of a war.
Right. That wouldn't be the way I understand it. So again, the war of thoughts is one of who can look out upon the world in the way that we see it today and say, I understand no matter what's going on out there, my war is within myself, and the war that I have within myself is between me and the Creator. And nothing out there matters. How many of us can do that? And that is the true battle. So you are talking, it's not just a philosophical war. And it's not a war of battling philosophies. However, that's actually quite a good, what's the word I'm looking for here? Good bridge, a good segue into what we're going to talk about and why I've chosen this particular book. And it was interesting timing. I already had the book, but I was forwarded a copy of an article that was written in Mishpacha magazine. It's not necessarily a magazine I'm familiar with, but Jewish Family Weekly. That's the name of this magazine. So I'll tell you how this starts, and I'll just abbreviate. I'll quickly go through the idea of it. So the first paragraph, it says, the Netzach Yisrael Beitz Medrash on Mesilat Yosef Street in Kiryat Sefer looks like any other shul in the city's Torah landscape, but it contains one of the best-kept public secrets of this staunchly Litvish town. Okay, so Litvish refers to the fact that it descends from the Lithuanian method of teaching, which is what most non-Hasidic yeshivas, and it's a very intellectual method of thought and teaching. The 120, they say, Avrechim, religious people, basically, who comprise the Kehila are actually closet Hasidim. They still maintain their Litvish dress, and they haven't switched their children into Hasidic schools. But these graduates of, and they name a few popular Litvish yeshivas, have become students of Kabbalah in Chabad and Breslov. So Chabad and Breslov are basically two different sides of the lineage of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov is known as basically the founder of the Hasidic movement. They pile into cars in the middle of the night for an hour-long Hispodadut in the nearby forest and spending Rosh Hashanah in Uman. Hispodadut is what Rabbi Wein has been talking about a lot at Third Meal in the last few weeks at least. The idea of isolating yourself for personal meditation. Could be literally physically isolating yourself for meditation and internal introspection, or it can be isolating yourself when you're within a group, like when you're praying in the morning or in the afternoon for introspection. So bottom line, what it's saying is that people are becoming involved as Chassids in the study of the Chassidut, in the study of the Hasidic masters, the Baal Shem Tov and his disciples. Over 200 years after the death of the Baal Shem Tov, in order to enhance their orthodox practice. They're not changing their orthodox practice. They're not running to the closest Chabad house. They're incorporating it into their current practice.
So is this, I can't think of a better word, like the resurrection of that movement?
Okay, so let's read one more thing, and then I'll try to answer that. Do you mind if I lower this a little bit? Is that okay?
Can you make it cooler?
Yeah, is that
that's
okay with
fine.
everyone? All right.
Thank you.
Okay, let's give that a try. All right, so we mentioned Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. We read one of we had one of his books, If You Were God.
Yeah, right.
That's Aryeh Kaplan. I don't know if everybody read it. It's not so important, but we know Aryeh Kaplan was a very reputable Kabbalistic rabbi. So this is a quote from him. I was once at a conference where it was discussed what kind of Judaism we will have in America 100 years from now. This is what Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan wrote in his book, Faces and Facets, published 10 years after his sudden passing in 1983. So he had to have written this sometime prior to 1983. So we're talking 35 plus years ago he wrote this. So again, we're quoting. Some people said the trend would be towards Reform Judaism. Others said it would be towards the middle, conservative movements. The pessimists said there would be no problem, given the current rise in intermarriage, for in 100 years there would be no Judaism in America at all. But one person suggests that 100 years from now, Hasidic Judaism would dominate the American Jewish scene. I would agree. The Hasidic spirit, the Hasidic philosophy, is certainly the up-and-coming thing. Perhaps this is our answer, the missing ingredient which will provide our coming generation with a new kind of Judaism, a turned-on Judaism. Maybe we have to get involved in this love affair of the Hasidim, this love affair with God. Okay? So some introductory words. And there's one other thing I'll quote here. They're talking to a particular rabbi who is again, not a Hasidic rabbi, but is teaching in this philosophy. And somebody approached him and said, people are calling this neo-Hasidim. That's what they're teaching it. So it says at this, he cringes when he hears this word. He says, I don't know about any neo-Hasidic movement, says Rabbi Weinberger. I'm just another Jew trying to come closer to Hashem. It's the same movement that started on Har Sinai with Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It's the message of the Baal Shem Tov and is being revived in the most remarkable way in 2018. Okay? I think it's been in the process of being revived for at least 30 years now, but yeah.
10 words or less.
Yeah.
Can you explain the Hasidic philosophy?
Yeah, so let's see. Actually, I think I just highlighted something. I can skip ahead very slightly here and tell you what this author says.
Are they a different philosophy than let's say, not modern Orthodox,
Right.
Orthodox Jews?
Right. And I guess what I would say to start is I'd be careful about looking at it that way, because I know that there are people who look at things that way. They might say, there are people who would never step foot in a Chabad house. And there are other people who believe that a Chabadnik would never step foot in here, which I don't think is accurate. But I don't think there's any reason to look at it that way anymore. But even within the Hasidic movement, meaning within the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, there was a lot of argument. But this guy, like I said, he basically comes from the movement that ended up into what we currently know as Chabad. And so what I'm going to try and find here and read to you very quickly is closer to, I guess, you could call it the Chabad philosophy than anything else. I can't say whether it applies to other things. I'm sure I just saw this. I'll try and find it. And if I don't find it, we'll start from the beginning and we'll come across it as we're reading.
They're kind of strange people. my grandmother had a brother, and he lived in Brooklyn, and we used to go visit him on a weekend, and this man was the strangest man. As a kid, I could remember his beliefs, his habits, his, even as far as like his, taking care of his body. They were strange people. I don't know if they still are, if they've changed in any way.
I've got something here. Can I read?
Go ahead.
It says, Chabad philosophy. Chabad philosophy comprises the teachings of the leaders of Chabad Lubavitch, a Hasidic movement. Chabad Hasidic philosophy focuses on religious concepts such as God, the soul, and the meaning of the Jewish commandments. Teachings are often drawn from the classical Judaic teachings and Jewish mysticism. That's all it says.
Right, which I think,
Doesn't say very much.
right, most of us would look at that and say, yeah, so how is that different from any other?
Yeah, it doesn't.
And I think that actually that probably is the point. But what I would say is that the Baal Shem Tov, when you hear stories of the Baal Shem Tov, you normally hear these very spiritually elevated stories. You hear stories of him as being more philosophical, as being very intuitive, being able to read people very quickly, and they kind of refer to him as enlightened, so to speak, but enlightened in what? Not just in knowledge, in spirit. And I think that that's really what you look at here. You're looking at the melding of knowledge and spirit. And you're seeing that across all levels of Judaism these days. And in fact, I would say most people have very little tolerance for a Jewish educational institution or for a Jewish religious institution that doesn't connect to your soul, that doesn't connect you philosophically to your religious roots, not just intellectually. And that is a relatively new concept in the Orthodox world, believe it or not. We may not see it that way, but it's true in terms of its prevalence. And that's really what this article was about, this article in Mishpatim. It was about, I'm sorry, not Mishpatim, in Mishpacha. It was about saying that like the war in Orthodox Judaism has been won. We've incorporated spiritual concepts into, it's not just a fringe idea anymore. It's everywhere now. And that's only going to be on the rise.
Can you give an example?
Well, when Rabbi Wein speaks,
Right.
he never stops with the raw halacha. If you went into a shul 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, some even currently, you will find that that's it. You're just learning raw halacha. And again, the last thing I want to do is criticize that. All I'm trying to say is that modern Jewry...
This is among friends.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying modern Jewry doesn't really tolerate that anymore.
You have to go further? Is that
You have to. You have to connect the people philosophically. And that's why the rabbi doesn't stop. And I'm sure he got that philosophy from his rabbi. If you read quotes from or read books from Rabbi Noach Weinberg, you'll see that he was a deeply philosophical man. He understood that you can't stop just with the intellectual education. But largely speaking, halacha was halacha, and you learned it. Even midrash, which is very esoteric, was learned for its intellectual qualities. It wasn't necessarily learned for the sake of the broader idea of how do I get closer to Hashem. It sounds very cosmic. It sounds very out there. And people didn't have a tolerance for that many, many years ago. Again, some people still don't. Some people refuse to see any grounds for interpretation. And we're going to find relatively quickly as we get into the introduction that this is something that Chabad insisted on. Chabad insisted on raising everything up to a higher level, of never stopping to look at something until you were satisfied that you understood how it would bring you closer to Hashem. Nothing was ever surface level. And that was the start of it. So nowadays, I can't draw as much a distinction. And that's why what you just read there, how much? Doesn't say so much other than, okay, from a history perspective, this is where it came from. But what is it now? What are any of us now? We're all people who are searching to be closer to Hashem.
Now, does the Tanya? I know I listen to Rabbi Gordon from L.A. every day, and after the Parsha, he has a section on Tanya.
Oh.
I never listened to it.
Oh, okay.
But is that like an interpretation of the Parsha? Is that?
It's not. It's not organized by.
Okay.
It's not organized by Parsha. So
I'll start to listen to it just to.
This is part one. It's called the Book for In-Betweeners, and we'll all understand why it's called the Book for In-Betweeners very shortly. But just, I'll read off a few of the chapter titles. Chapter 1, Am I Good or Bad? Chapter 2, The Peace of God in You. Chapter 3, Your Three Brains. Chapter 4, Your Inner and Outer Selves. Chapter 5, Total Immersion in the Divine. So this one, just the part 1, looks like it has 53 chapters. So you can imagine how deep we're going to get here. I can only imagine how deep we're going to get here. I'm very much looking forward to this myself. I'm going to try and stay as far ahead as I can. But I think we're all going to learn a lot together. I hope. So
that's where you make the big bucks.
There you go. There you go. So let's learn a little bit about the author of the Tanya. So he's often referred to as the Bala Tanya, which means he's the master of the Tanya. It's just his most famous work. He wrote many things, but this is his most famous work. So his name is Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, born in 1745. He was already known at the age of 15 to be basically the most brilliant in his town. He was married to the daughter of a local businessman, showed incredible intellectual talent. Here's one of the things it says about him. Apparently for the next 15 years, meaning from when he was 15 years until he was around 30, he reviewed the entire Talmud at least once a year, which is why we heard from his holy mouth that while he was residing in the community of Mogilev on the Dnieper River in 1777, he was reviewing the Talmud for the 16th time. So that's an incredible accomplishment. I mean, we know, because we have something called the Daf Yomi system that was put in place, that if you learn one daf, one page, and a page is this big, there's a lot of commentary on it. If you learn one daf a day, it takes 7.5 years. 7 years or 7.5 years, right? So you figure in order to learn it in a year, you got to be studying 7 pages a day. And you see like what a dedication it takes to get through.
He's 20 pages ahead.
Okay, so he was the Baal Shem Tov. His primary student was a guy named the Maggid of Mezrich, and the Maggid of Mezrich had a few different disciples. Rabbi Shneur Zalman was the youngest of his disciples, and yet the Maggid quoted him this way: "He was extremely precious, to no limits, in the eyes of our master, the Maggid, who would praise him greatly all the time." So he was beloved, he was known to be great, and he later was associated with both the Maggid and with the Maggid's son. So there are other teachers, Chabadniks and other teachers in the Hasidic movement who claim some connection to the Maggid, but very few of them directly connected with the Maggid, directly learned from him, or learned from his son. And we can assume that the Maggid's son learned directly from his father, the Maggid. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman had exposure to both. So we'll see a little bit later how significant that is. And it says here that Rabbi Shneur Zalman's association with Rabbi Avraham, who was the Maggid's son, enabled him to receive unfiltered wisdom from the Maggid in the fashion of a father to son. So it was almost like Rabbi Shneur Zalman had his own father-to-son relationship with the Maggid. And he quotes him often. He quotes the Maggid often. So then it begins to talk about an idea of problems that the Hasidic movement had within the established rabbinic authorities of the time. And it says in the spring of 1772, an outright war was proclaimed against Hasidim when Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, known as the Vilna Gaon, who was the most revered scholar in Europe, proclaimed that it was a duty to repel them and pursue them and reduce them and drive them from the land. This was the rabbinic authority at the time fighting against the Hasidic movement.
Is that actually physical war?
Yeah, I'm going to skip this quote from Rabbi Shneur Zalman because I don't have a source for it, but basically Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying yes. It's as if they spilled blood. It was that outrageous. Later they tried to appease the Vilna Gaon, and it says Rabbi Shneur Zalman at the age of 27 was chosen to accompany Rabbi Menachem Mendel, who was one of the rabbis who took over for. I don't know. There's not going to be any tests on these names. This is just a background on who this man Rabbi Shneur Zalman is. That we should know him and love him and understand him and see why he chose to write this. So he was chosen at the age of 27 to be one of the disciples who tried to go and appease the Vilna Gaon. Imagine somebody of 27 being brought into such a role. You have to imagine again. They must assume that he's going to add great value to the situation. However, it says the Vilna Gaon had already formed his opinion of them and refused to greet them. And there was later a debate that Rabbi Shneur Zalman participated in that also didn't end well for the Hasidim. So they continue to have more and more problems, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman's role continued to grow more and more. More so because the Maggid, his teacher, passed away, and the other two disciples that were part of the framework, the Hasidic framework that was meant to disseminate the teachings, moved to Israel. So the other two prime rabbis moved to Israel, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman was more or less left on his own in, I guess, what at the time they called White Russia. Then Rabbi Shneur Zalman was arrested by the Russians, supposedly at the behest of the rabbinic authority at the time. First in 1798, again in 1801. He later moved to a different city, at least in part because of that. And there's an idea that his arrest and later his release, at least in part, was looked at by them by the Hasidic movement as like encouragement from Hashem, validation from Hashem that they were doing the right thing, and that'll come out again in just a minute here, I think. Here it speaks about that Rabbi Shneur Zalman had 3 sons and 3 daughters. His oldest son, Rabbi Dov Ber, who we'll learn about a little bit more later, established a Hasidic court in Lubavitch, and that's ultimately what became the Lubavitcher movement. So when you hear about their Lubavitchers, so that Lubavitcher and Chabad, to my understanding, are synonymous. That's why it's called Lubavitcher, because they ordained a Hasidic court in the city of Lubavitch. And he helped to make sure that these writings were published later. Then it says in the author's introduction, he writes a pastoral letter, and he indicates that the Tanya is a collection of the advice that he had offered to his disciples in private counseling sessions. So imagine that, Rabbi Wein collected everything that he had spoken about in private, and he collected into basically a book form, so we could all learn in a let's say it in a revealing for us, but non-revealing. He's not the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Imagine that he were to compile all that information from his private meetings and to be able to share it in a way. And in some ways, he does. A lot of times in his drushas, he will say, "I was meeting with a guy the other day at Coffee Bean, and he shared with me, here is his story." And then he goes on to share maybe the advice that he gave him. Well, imagine that he were to take not only all those stories and all the advice, but all the results of the advice and all the things that he had learned from all the advice and all the ways that all the people had. That's basically what this is. That's what the Tanya is. Now, we're going to get into a minute why that's what it is, but that's what it is. The Tanya is a collection of all of his private counseling sessions over the course of many years. There's more here. It was very interesting for me to read a lot about the history But again, cutting to the chase, Rabbi Shneur Zalman's public role emerged gradually, it says, from informal leadership in 1781 into formal and joint leadership in 1782. This is when I was telling you there were basically 3 rabbis who were appointed, and then sole leadership, which was consolidated roughly between 1786 and 1788. So this is when his teacher passed away, one of the other teachers passed away, 2 of the other teachers had moved to Israel, and basically all the opposition to his teaching was eliminated. So he was able to basically act with full authority on behalf of the Hasidic movement at this point. So
That opposition was within the Hasidic movement.
it was also, and I think that comes out in just a minute here also. So it says that he was prompted, at least in part, to write this because he could no longer handle the flow of visitors flocking to see him. Sometime before 1793, he issued Liozna regulations, severely curtailing to the extent to which his disciples could visit him for a private meeting. So as much as he wanted to visit with people in private, he just simply was no longer able to. And at least part of the reason why he was motivated to write this was because he just couldn't do it anymore. So it says that the writing and ultimately dissemination of these manuscripts were his attempt to broaden the influences of his leadership while also reducing the demands on him personally. And then he had a split with Rebbe Avram of Kalsik. This is one of the other Hasidic rabbis. His movement, Rebbe Shneur Zalman's movement, became known as Chabad Hasidism due to its emphasis on the mind in worship. So that might give you an idea of where the philosophy of Chabad comes from. The involvement of the mind in the process of worshiping. And the idea that the Tanya then transcended many of the organizational and geographical boundaries of the Hasidic movement and became known well throughout the entire Orthodox world, not just in Chabad. And it says eventually it became known as the Bible, the Torah Shebichtav of the Hasidic thought. So this documents a great deal of what we're going to learn becomes the basic philosophy behind the Hasidic movement. So now he goes through some of the origins of the teachings that are in here. So it says an important first-hand account by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of the Kabbalistic works that informed him is found in the testimony that he provided to the Russian authorities during his 1798 arrest and imprisonment. He states that while Kabbalistic wisdom, quote, is written in books, nevertheless a person must begin his study by one Rav, and he can then subsequently study from the books. This is what happened to me. When I was approximately 20 years old, I traveled to Mezrich, and I began to study Kabbalah there with Rabbi Bear, and since then, I studied by myself from many respectable books of Kabbalah, both earlier and later works, according to my own understanding. And part of what he says here, it's actually a very interesting story here. He says, he talked about how he studies the Tanya himself. So one of his students actually asked him, really, why would you study your own works? And here's what he says. I find more original ideas here than I found in Mezrich. Now, to some idea, this sounds insulting. How could he find more ideas in his own writing than he did from his teacher, who was the inspiration for his writing? So, what it says is, this anecdote clearly points to the presence of some original content in the Tanya, meaning not all of this is just from his teacher. He does have some original thoughts. But it also seems to be that that he's saying that even he was surprised at how many original ideas were in the text, and that he was only able to find and perceive these ideas later after writing the book. So there were many original ideas that he learned from his teacher, but they only became revealed to him once he was able to put it in writing and study it himself. Now, it does go on to say the vast majority of the Tanya is undoubtedly based on oral teachings which he heard in Mezrich. And as he wrote to one of his colleagues, I did not ask to. This is one of the colleagues he had a conflict with. I did not ask for your approval of my Hasidic teachings, since they are sayings uttered by the holy mouth of our great rabbi. So basically, he's saying, I don't need to ask for your permission as one of my colleagues, because I heard it directly from our master. And again, it's trying to re-emphasize this all comes from the source. This is word of mouth, teacher, either father to son or teacher to teacher. This is not one person's interpretation. And one particular reviewer of this work, he says, to give you an idea of where this comes from, the Zohar is mentioned in the Tanya 49 times. Luria, meaning Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Ari, 10 times. Vital in his works, this is Rabbi Chaim Vital. This is Rabbi Chaim Vital is the one who wrote down the sayings of the Ari, 29 times. Maimonides 5 times, Nachmanides once. So basically you're talking about he's again trying to emphasize how philosophical this is. It's based on the Zohar, it's based on Kabbalistic teachings, based on teachings of the Ari, which again were disseminated and organized through his teachers, the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich.
Is there any hint? Has he hinted at anything about anything being divine?
Oh, meaning that that some of this was inspired to him directly from. I haven't seen anything like that yet. I think what he's trying to say is, these are the words of my master. He's really trying to ground it as much as he can. So here's where some of the conflicts started coming up. So Rabbi Abraham, this is one of his key critics, Rabbi Abraham of Kalisk, he says, quote, I do not approve that you have taken the words of our holy rabbi of Mezrich, again their teacher, which are the holy words of the Baal Shem Tov, and you, he's accusing this rabbi, and you have mixed them together with the holy words of the Ari, of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. And he's basically saying that Rabbi Shneur Zalman invented this. He invented the idea of mixing the teachings from his masters with the teachings of the Ari. And basically Rabbi Shneur Zalman disputes this. And what I should say is this author disputes that that's what was really trying to get across. The real dispute was Rabbi Avraham probably did know that their master taught from the Kabbalistic teachings, but he viewed it, Rabbi Avraham viewed it as a communication aimed exclusively at the elite group who were privy to hear it at the Maggid's table. And it was not something to be shared with the master, with the masses. And this is really what Rabbi Shneur Zalman, this is how he differed from the other teachers. He differed by saying, no, it's for the masses. I'm bringing this to the masses. It was always intended to be. And it says at the core of the dispute was the question, how is Chassidus, meaning the teachings of the Hasidic masters, to be adapted for mass consumption? Rabbi Shneur Zalman was of the opinion that at least a modified version of the advanced concepts and techniques he had heard and learned in Mezrich should be made available to the public. And this is why he wrote the Tanya. In this book, which like I said is called the Book for In-Betweeners, the Book of In-Betweeners represented as much of the Maggid's wisdom that ordinary people could reasonably implement in their worship if they would try hard and seek clarification from their own mentors when necessary. Bottom line, this is made for us. We're the in-betweeners. We're what's called the Benonim, and we'll get to that in a minute also. Actually, I think Rabbi Wein talks about this idea of Benonim every year around Yom Kippur, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. He says, we're never supposed to look at ourselves as entirely pure or entirely evil. We're the Benonim. We're somewhere in between, and that's kind of where we want to be. We want to be in that balanced state. And so this was written for us.
But isn't that, by saying that this was not for the masses, isn't that similar to Kabbalah? Where they say, they're making that a distinction.
That is exactly what it is. And that's exactly where the dispute continues. It says, a notable issue dividing them was the question of whether the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov should be taught within the framework of Lurianic Kabbalah. Meaning, should you combine these philosophical ideas that this rabbi has with actual Kabbalah from the Ari? And the Maggid is said to have expounded on Kabbalah even in public, And he emphasized the knowledge necessary to achieve higher states of mind, where one of the other rabbis chose not to do that. He chose to basically keep it private. So this lineage, the lineage of the Baal Shem Tov to the Maggid, to Rabbi Shneur Zalman, is the lineage that says, yes, we should be teaching Kabbalah to the masses. We should be speaking about it in public. We should be accepting the idea that people can incorporate it into their minds, that they can incorporate it into their worship, and they can incorporate it into ways that become closer to Hashem. That they can. And that's again, I think that brings us quite well into the modern day. That people don't accept the idea that you can't speak philosophy in Judaism. It was always there. The philosophical concepts and ideas were always there 2,000, 3,000, 3,500 years ago. It's all part of the oral tradition. Kabbalah is part of the oral tradition too. The question is, at what point are you able to incorporate it into, what type of a mind is able to bring it into their being without becoming crazy or becoming completely distracted or doing more harm than good. And this philosophy is basically saying it's worth it. It's worth it to disseminate this information. And why is it worth it? Because my master did it. Why is it worth it? Because his master did it. And he's refusing to stop. Even though some of the other disciples decided you misunderstood. Basically, they're telling him, you misunderstood. Our teachers taught certain things in public because they knew what they were doing or because they knew who they were speaking to. And we're not supposed to do that. He says, no, I'm moving on. I'm continuing on. That's why I'm writing the... Okay, so then it says, he further emphasized his direct continuity with the Maggid's thought by stressing on the title page of the Tanya that it's just a wisdom anthologized from his teacher, and that there's an internal Chabad tradition that describes how Rabbi Shneur Zalman naturally shied away from leadership. And he was only convinced to speak in public when his wife assured him, quote, they are only coming here to hear what you merited to learn from your teacher. That's the only reason they're coming. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman didn't even want to teach it. But his wife convinced him, you need to share because people want to hear from your master. And you're the only way to share directly from the master. And here it says, the Kabbalistic content of Rabbi Shneur Zalman's public discourses was considerably enriched after his release from imprisonment by the Russian authorities in 1798. According to Hasidic tradition, Rabbi Shneur Zalman saw his release as a sign that his approach to teaching Chassidus had been ratified in heaven, and he subsequently pursued the path even more vigorously. So the fact that he was in prison and later released, he saw that as permission from heaven to keep on with his philosophy and his way of doing things. And he doubled down basically on it.
Does it ever mention people think about him as being a prophet?
I think that's one of the most interesting things because you don't hear that. I've heard incredible stories, more personal stories of him, of the Maggid, of the Seer of Lublin. I think Rabbi Wein even shares his story sometimes, from the Baal Shem Tov, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, from the last Rebbe. But nobody ever claimed them to be prophets, and they certainly never claimed for themselves to be prophets. They had connections to Hashem, I think, that we just kind of don't understand. They were inspired in ways that we haven't fully gotten to. But I think that their intention, and part of the reason why the Rebbe was, again, why they say he's the last Rebbe, and why it's up to us from now on, is because they're saying, you can all achieve my level. There's nothing to stop you. And again, I think this is part of the way to get there. So fast forwarding almost 200 years, the Rebbe, as they refer to him, the seventh and last Lubavitcher Rebbe, initiated a campaign to print the Tanya in every country that had a Jewish presence. So he saw opportunity to reinvigorate the Tanya throughout the masses. So this was 40 years ago, exactly 40 years ago. And it says within 3 weeks after him making this plea, over 80 editions have been printed. The campaign prompted a large ongoing response from his followers, and by 2008, so this is over the course of 30 years. 5,300 editions of the Tanya have been printed in different locations. And it talks about some of the locations that they were printed in. It's quite unbelievable. They're printed on the top of Mount Everest. Why? I'm not sure I can explain why, but just the idea, the fascination of making sure that this wisdom was disseminated. It's seen as being that important. So this author, he's trying to give a little bit more of an introduction. This is Rebbe Chaim Miller. He's saying here that very little commentary on the Tanya was ever formally written down. It was only more recently that that's become available, probably largely because of printing costs. And it says actually the first complete running commentary of the Tanya wasn't even made available until looks like the 1930s. And again, he gives a little more history. He speaks about a particular rabbi who was authorized to give classes on the radio in New York, and the involvement of the 6th and then later the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe. And then it says a recurring theme in the Rebbe, and again, every time I say the Rebbe, we're referring to the last Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he's of our generation. A recurring theme in his own notes in the Tanya was his deference to the oral tradition of the Tanya interpretation as it has been taught in the Lubavitcher yeshiva system in Russia. So, interestingly enough, the Rebbe didn't learn at the Lubavitcher yeshiva. Okay, and there's reasons for that. He doesn't really go into that here. He actually references another book where you could learn about that. He made significant notes about it, and then in some cases what he would do is he would instruct people who were learning and commenting on the Tanya. He would instruct them, why don't you go back to your fellow students at the yeshiva and ask them what they learned through the oral tradition. And it's to me the reason why I thought that was worth mentioning is it shows the humility of the Rebbe. So the Rebbe, he was, again, people looked at him about as close to the Messiah as anyone in the modern generation. And at the same time, he had the humility to say, I didn't go to the same school you guys did. I didn't learn in the same philosophy you did. And even though I'm the master and I'm the leader, I trust that the things that you learned through the oral tradition at your yeshiva are reliable, and I trust you to document them appropriately. And please don't rely exclusively on me or exclusively on my notes. And I think it's just a beautiful philosophy and concept that the lead rabbi could have such humility. Mentions another rabbi, a Rabbi Khan, and I single him out because it says he served for over 40 years as the chief scholar responsible for memorizing the Rebbe's highly complex thoughts as they were delivered so they could later be transcribed. So you think about on Shabbat, you can't record Rabbi Wein speak. So imagine that we assign somebody in the shul to memorize everything that he said and write it down later. So the Rebbe had such a person.
Wouldn't be me.
For 40 years, this man was responsible for that, and much of what this Rabbi Chaim Miller, documents here, he learned out from the Rebbe's lectures that were memorized and later written down into hundreds. It says 566 segments, approximately 20 to 30 minutes each, so 219 running hours of commentary associated with this guy's memorizing the Rebbe. And then it says after the Rebbe passed in 1994, there was a project that was put together in order to publish his private notebooks. And many of his private notebooks had additional notes on the Tanya. So that's how we learned more and more about oral tradition, written tradition, philosophy, all kinds of things that were brought down. So I'm going to, just a couple more minutes, we're going to end tonight. I just want to share, this is the author's personal note, or part of his personal note to us as his reader. He says, the Tanya opened a world of insight for me that I did not believe existed within Judaism. I had grown up with some traditional observance and had attended Kenton United Synagogue. I think it's a synagogue in England. But I found no real intellectual or spiritual stimulation in these activities. I think we can probably all, the word I'm looking for here. We
Relate to.
relate to. Thank you. We can all relate to that. Being Jewish was important to me in a cultural sense. I mixed in the social circles of Northwest London, and I was committed to marrying Jewish. But for my first 20 years, I had seen no indication that Judaism offered real insight into higher living. For me, being Jewish was just an ethnicity, and sometimes even there a challenging one. The Tanya changed all of this. In these pages, I discovered that Judaism was intellectually sophisticated, not only in the Maimonidean sense of abstract philosophy, but as a deep psychology. The Tanya was extremely relatable. It offered a guide to the soul, which resonated as real and applicable, and its sublime, esoteric terminology added a transcendent dimension so that the Tanya's wisdom was directed simultaneously at the body, mind, emotions, and spirit. Somehow, all these psycho-spiritual tools have been seamlessly integrated with traditional Judaism, the biblical and rabbinic laws with which I was to some extent familiar. As I absorbed more of the Tanya's wisdom, I experienced an inner transformation. And God willing, this is what we'll all find as we continue our study of the Tanya.
Interesting.
And on that note,